Previously on Detour Hotel.
Rawlings had gotten TBI to secure the scene until the Harpers' arrival, though it was likely that he'd be written up for it. He waved his officers out of the path and pointed at the ambulance. Wells noted that the windows on the Harpers' SUV had been so hastily scraped free of frost that a crooked, opaque meridian remained on the windshield. It looked to Wells as though they had each scraped their sides separately. Chapter 28. Roy Harper had always been nostalgic. The bulk of his conversations had revolved around how good things once were, even when he was too young to exhibit the requisite level of wistfulness. He'd routinely mention hilarious things that had previously occurred, good memories that he had. If he'd had a particularly fond memory that he shared with a person, that would often become the linchpin of any off-the-cuff conversations. A nickname, a knowing metaphor. If he didn't yet have a fond memory with you, he was waiting for one to occur. That ability to crystallize a moment was so key to preserve a connection. He considered himself nostalgic for nostalgia's sake. Kitschy. A tongue-in-cheek display of tongue-in-cheek. Others at the office had ragged on him about always having predictable lines that he employed in the service of casual chit-chat. He knew that he was predictable, an office character. For years this sustained him. It offered him safe entries in which to discuss guarded details about his life, his wife, his daughter. He had jokey deflections for their realities. Captain Rawlings, it appeared as if Harper was already coping with something far before Cara Ann died. He was always doing the best he could. Inquiries remained superficial. That was best in the face of the stark work that they often performed. They had on many occasions discovered scenes of horror and sadness beyond description. Rawlings specifically recalled being in a room filled with buzzing flies. The deceased person before them many weeks expired, and in that foul nightmare he recalled Harper's gentle motion in removing the watch from the swollen wrist so that they could mercifully use it to identify the deceased with the next of kin. Harper undoing the clasp and looking up at Rawlings with some brief yet infinite knowing behind a cotton breath mask. Yet there never was that long, stereotypical confessional car ride between them, or a late night at the bar that led to some sort of bond or breakdown of the wall. It was a thankfully unconsummated fraternal relationship. After Harper lost Cara Ann, he felt as though he had come to abuse the mechanism of nostalgia. His mind couldn't support the fragility of those emotions. Memory was only to be employed in the service of laughter or investigation or pleasure. Any other use had become impossible. Over time, Harper's memories had become warped and pulled apart by dreams resembling his experiences. His recollections were not the way that he left them. He had dreamt of exhaustively mopping away the footprints of thousands of people in his home. White, beige, clay smears and snow outside the windows. Vague shame upon waking. Prayer was another exercise of his memory, the echo of desire painted upon a condition. Those pleas came with a tax. By deconstructing the memories of Cara Ann, he couldn't fit them together properly after use. When he was in community college, he had worked on restoring his uncle's Ford Falcon sedan. He had undone the dashboard to fix the cassette deck and reattach an electrical cord for the light above the odometer. When he went to remount the dash, something was awry. Every seam had an extra eighth of an inch of space. The whole thing rattled when in motion. He had gotten every screw in hand tight and every mount was on just right. Despite the powerful frame, it was a more delicate creature than he had anticipated. His memories were just the same. They seemed made of paper. Each time he unfolded them, they lost fidelity along their edges. The paper grew flimsy. Only key portions remained vivid. Some were better in the presence of sunlight or familiar scents, but the rest were pathetic reconstructions or elements bent by the mist of his mind. It crushed him that something seemingly so close could be reverted to mystery. If one couldn't accurately remember occurrences or thoughts or discussions, how did one know themselves? 2 months after Cara Ann died, much to Harper's horror and the detriment of his physical health, Harper could only vividly recall 3 preoccupying memories. Chapter 29. The Foxtrot. August 30th, 2014. Cara Ann tugged at Roy's hand in the amber evening light. The green metal arches of Centennial Park's largest pavilion were strung with dozens of rustic electric lights and paper lanterns for the popular summer dance instruction series. A 30-piece brass band was playing standards from the American Songbook, and Cara Ann was antsy with delight. "You have to be my partner," she begged him. Her coaxing had not yet been effective. Roy stared at the ceiling and counted the dots of rust and swaying spider webs. Cara Ann again tried to grab his hands, and he shied away. She huffed at him and turned to flee. "There'll be a boy that'll dance with me, and you're gonna get mad about it," she said over her shoulder as she merged into the crowd of hundreds of eager dancers. As the instructor rounded up the crowd and separated the men and women, Roy sauntered over to the blanket to find that Polly had opened a bottle of sweet wine. He lowered himself to the ground and picked up a glass. "You ought to be out there dancing with your daughter," Polly said. She poured him an inch and corked the bottle. He examined it and gulped it in one long drag. "You ought to be out there dancing with your daughter," he replied. She bit her tongue and looked away. An ice cream truck was bumper to bumper with a barbecue truck, and the line of smiling people waiting for food stretched circuitously around the pavilion. Roy poured a few additional ounces of wine into the glass and slugged it down. "You scared someone might see you having a good time?" Polly asked him. He sucked his teeth and closed his eyes. "It's too crowded up there. There's a bunch of people that aren't paying a lick of attention to anyone else, and they're going to knock people over or step on their feet, and I ain't going to be one of them. If there's a moment where it thins out, I'll think about it. It doesn't matter how well I do, Cara Ann will appreciate it," he said. He watched Cara Ann carefully learn to foxtrot with a boy about her age. She was leaning in toward him, but he was nervously keeping his distance. The instructor told the crowd to hold their hands higher, and they followed suit. "You're never getting up there to dance. You're full of it." Polly stared at her phone as she rocked in her lawn chair. Her sunglasses glistened with the shine of the screen. Roy stared at her flip-flops and sneered. "Always a goddamn struggle." The lesson eventually concluded, and the couples performed 16 bars of foxtrot practice. After a big swell of applause, the band performed songs from the American Songbook, and dancers were free to foxtrot or cha-cha or contra until 9 p.m. With the cumbersome hunt and peck made necessary by overly manicured nails, Polly typed out a Facebook post explaining her husband's refusal to dance with his daughter. It read, "Fabulous night at the big band dance. Roy refuses to learn to foxtrot with Cara Ann. It's a formative experience for her, as her father is too cool to be seen having a good time." Polly read the post to Roy as he quickly grew to anger. "That's a bitchy thing to write. You know I never post on Facebook," he told her. "There, that'll be then, your social media footprint. I'm a wet blanket that won't dance with my daughter at the summer big band series. You can untag yourself." Polly put her phone away and scowled at him. They spent the next 20 minutes in tight-lipped silence. Roy looked from dancer to dancer, deciding on ways that they were inferior or annoying. Occasionally, Cara Ann would flash by as she wheeled about the dance floor. Polly motored through the internet silently next to him. After the conclusion of a Frank Sinatra tune, Cara Ann trotted over and fell to her knees on the quilt that they'd put down. "Oh my gosh, I am whipped," she said as she unscrewed the cap on a bottle of water. "You having a good time?" Polly asked. "Yeah, there's 15 more minutes till the next lesson," she said. Roy coughed and got to his feet. "I don't think so. I'm getting eaten up by mosquitoes. Come on, Cara Ann, that's it for tonight." She scoffed quietly and squirmed with repressed defiance. Roy gathered up the chairs and the empty wine bottle. "Roy, you haven't been bit a single time. Sit down," Polly told him. He pointed his forearm. "What's that?" "That's 2 bites, actually." He pointed back and forth at a single, debatably irritated area. Polly rolled her eyes. "You drank all the rest of that wine. I guess it's just all about you," Polly said as she laboriously got to her feet. "For once in my damn life it ought to be," he said. There was no reckoning with Roy in this state. Cara Ann got to her feet in silence and helped her parents carry their picnic tackle to the car. Dozens of people were still arriving to the dance. Cara Ann stopped and watched the newcomers pick out seats. "Cara Ann," Polly called to her. Cara Ann counted to 5 and then continued her walk to the car. She wiped sweat from her brow and squeezed her chin into a powerful frown. The sun contacted the horizon as she threw the blanket into the trunk of the car. Roy slammed the door as hard as he could, and Polly stared at him, mouth agape. "You are embarrassing yourself and the rest of us. Slamming the trunk like that, Roy. Calm down," she told him. He jumped into the car and fished his keys from his pocket. "No one gives a damn if I slam the trunk," Roy said as he buckled his seatbelt. "You fight like people my age," Cara Ann said. Roy started the car and sighed. "I've been 14 years old for about 30 years now. I know how it's done." Polly crossed her arms and shook her head. "I learned something tonight. A couple of things, I guess." "You want to know what I learned?" Cara Ann said. Neither Roy nor Polly answered her. "I learned that you can't pick who your parents are. You can pick who you dance with, and you can pick the classes you want to take, and you can pick a husband. Heck, you can pick 3 husbands, but your mom and your dad are the same old jerks they were when you were born," Cara Ann said. "You don't know a damn thing about what you're talking about," Roy said. Cara Ann made eye contact with him in the rearview mirror. She shook her head slowly, the ruddy patches under her eyes glowing with summer color. She couldn't be contained for much longer, he realized. He watched as she looked away, gazing softly out the window toward the distant party. The steering wheel creaked with the tension of Roy's grip as he backed out of the parking spot. September 13th, 2016. Naloxone. Harper slid his fingers underneath Cara Ann's soft cheek. She hadn't responded to knocks, bargains, slams, and finally the shattering of the flimsy white bedroom door from its frame. One fragile sliver had flown across the room and had struck the far wall. Cara Ann did not stir. It was 5:15 in the afternoon. What kind of terrible thing happened at 5:15 in the afternoon? Harper's fury had rapidly faded as he touched Cara Ann's cool, ashen face. "God damn it," he said. He looked back at the door. Polly was in the hallway with her phone in her hand. "Should I?" she breathlessly questioned him. "Not yet. She's still breathing," he said. He laid Cara Ann's head back to the edge of her bed. She had vomited a slimy mess of opal froth on the sheets. He tore the top drawer from her nightstand and emptied it on the floor. He tossed the wooden box to the side and rifled through the contents. Papers, thumb drives, pens, pictures, bubble gum, dozens of items of teenage detritus. He stood and marched to her closet. He emptied drawer after drawer. "Roy, do we need to call an ambulance or what? The blame can wait." He took a deep breath and faced her. "I'm not going to get arrested if she's got dope in here," he told Polly. "Roy, they won't arrest us. They'll help her. We have to get her help," she whimpered from the hallway. The afternoon sun faded to a bright semicircle on the horizon. "It's our house. They'll charge us," he growled at her. She poked her head into the room. "If she dies, imagine what'll happen then. We have to get her help. The narcotics drug, Narcan. If she's still breathing, she'll make it. We can sort the rest out later." Polly unlocked the phone and dialed 911. Roy marched over and snatched the phone away from her. "I'd rather her die than destroy all of our lives." Polly's face melted to an unspeakable horrification. As the shock of Roy's statement processed, her adrenaline tingles bloomed into a powerful rage. Roy was going to let her daughter die in front of her. This indignity broke her voice into bizarre squeals as she screamed at him. "I'd rather you die. You're insane, you bastard!" She pushed him aside and leapt onto the bed with Cara Ann. She turned her over and squeezed her close to her chest. "Wake up, baby, wake up," she whispered into her ear. Polly laid her flat and took her pulse. "She's still alive. Call the police. They have Narcan. She has to have it." "Look," Polly said. She dug around in the sheets and offered a small Ziploc bag containing the faint traces of gray powder. Roy watched from across the room, aghast at Polly's pleas. "Is this what you were looking for? Then take it. Get rid of it. Do whatever. Damn it, Roy. Call the police. I can barely feel a pulse." Roy looked down at the phone in his hand. The number was already dialed. He'd just need to submit. Polly dissolved into grumbling nonsense as she pulled Cara Ann down on the floor and started to do compressions on her chest. Her wet lips quivered with Polly's resuscitory impacts. Roy hesitantly tapped the screen and brought the phone to his ear. In Roy's recollection of these moments, he'd had a preternatural coolness at beholding the shock of his daughter's overdose. He'd had a requisite anger, fatherly judgment, and the reaction that any sane father would have had in that situation. But it was complicated. It wasn't just Cara Ann that was struggling. She had betrayed them, he told himself. In rarer moments, the comprehension grew that perhaps he'd been the one that had betrayed Cara Ann. Maybe Polly was right. He hadn't had a quick, sensible reaction. He denied his helplessness. He'd read about people putting up walls of denial. This felt more like a trench. After the paramedic administered the naloxone, Cara Ann's eyes rolled to life and gazed upon Roy standing above her. They didn't stir or dilate. She didn't cry or scream. She looked up at him with a calm defiance, a resignation. One horrific lock of hair was smeared across her face with the froth of asphyxiated saliva. Her eyes had that same thick sheen as when she was a newborn. As he examined these memories, he began to realize that maybe the betrayal had started long before that September day. Imperfect as it may have been, he stood behind his stoic judgment of her problem. Maybe it would have been easier if Cara Ann just went ahead and died that day. He thought that once or twice. He imagined busting into the room and finding her cold and stiff, the same saliva pasting her face, but far too late. A hellish fantasy, but it was an option that opened some dimension of escape for him. It taped back together separate portions of his life. That was what was behind the unchosen door number 1. Polly's escape was more straightforward. On October 30th, Harper came home to find many of their items missing. Cara Ann wasn't there, as usual, to explain the disappearance of pictures, plates, and clothes. After a few minutes of pathetic suspicion that they'd been robbed or something even wilder than that, he realized that Polly had moved out. Roy dug through drawers looking for some rational explanation for her flight. He called her again and again, foolishly expecting her to pick up the phone. After finding a glass that Polly apparently didn't want, he used it to slug down 2 bottles of liquor and woke up the next morning, Halloween of all days, with his pants-pissed head roaring, fortunes lost on the carpet of the family room floor. Subconsciously, he needed that fugue to deserve what he'd already deserved. He wanted to inhabit the cretin that he'd apparently portrayed to those he loved. No one was there to see it. Cara Ann came home the following day and paid him little attention. It became clear that she had Polly's side, even though she never explicitly said so. She never explicitly said much of anything. The newly fixed door to her room was often locked whether she was there or not. When Cara Ann wasn't in her room on the evening of December 19th, Roy had another strong suspicion. He was tempted to be dismissive at the conspicuously open door. The icy glow of streetlights outside confronted him with the heavy vacuum of human presence. Her room smelled of tropical hairspray, but it was as empty as sin. At that moment, staring at her unmade and empty bed, he didn't know Cara Ann. She had finally turned into the ghost that he had accused her of being. Chapter 31. December 27th, 2016. Cara Ann's funeral. There were 16 sprays of calla lilies arrayed in a semicircle in the shallow apse of the Sylvan Park Church of Christ. Metro PD had so many donors that some of the flowers were sent straight to the graveside service. The church had nowhere to place them. State Senator Connors was in attendance. It was the Tuesday after Christmas, and a lot of folks in the community took off work to come out and pay their respects. Dozens of other staff members were out of town but had sent their deepest sympathies. Polly and Roy were given a pew of their own to sit in. The symbolism was sympathetic but did nothing to obviate their isolation. The church had cadet blue carpet that had been stomped thin by the vascular weekly circulation of faithful in and out of aisles and pews. Roy had only attended twice in the past 3 years. Police officers directed traffic on Whitebridge Pike for the entire hour of the service. News Channel 4 had set up shop outside for a simple B-roll shot. Out of respect for the family, the producers had decided that they would rely mostly on footage from the preceding week, with a brief cutaway to Cara Ann's headshot for the first half of the 30-second story. The second half of the coverage contained a recap of the circumstances of her discovery and a brief on the ongoing criminal investigation into her death. It ran at 5:14 p.m., the last story before a commercial break. The first commercial and the accompanying break was for Fessler Pharmaceuticals Releftrex. America's most popularly prescribed opiate-related constipation medication. Pastor Gregory Gray delivered a stodgy homily that left most in attendance unsatisfied. Roy felt as though a large, alien planet had suddenly appeared and blocked out the sun for him. A harsh eclipse. Everything was so out of order. He remembered loading the coffin into the hearse, but he didn't remember who helped him. He wasn't wearing gloves, and the palls were so cold that his palms stuck to the chrome. He could have sworn that they'd loaded her up before the service, though it didn't make any sense to have done so. His brother was there. He'd seen pictures of himself from that day. He was smiling and laughing in some of them. He remembered smiling and laughing. This was the safety of casual bullshit. He was dissociated, in a grief trance. He hadn't slept at all and was being guided from place to place by friends and acquaintances. Everyone was draping themselves on him in a rain of tears. It was ugly. He nervously chuckled in a detached need to reassure people far removed that they were going to be okay. He'd always hated sympathy, and even more hated how much Polly reveled in it. He didn't have the energy to hate that day. That Tuesday, it was a Tuesday. Haggard and lost, he immediately regretted allowing roses to be tossed into the open grave. The images of roses lying atop the shield of the coffin would prove an unforgettable horror. The memory of that green pop-up tent was his temple of rain, the background noise weathered thumps of plant material on casket lid. Chapter 32. Word was getting around the Detour Hotel that there was a body. The temperature had barely broken freezing all day, and the low was forecast to be 20. It was the longest night of the year, and some of the toughest of the neighborhood dudes had even decided to hit the shelter. By 5 a.m., the last remaining holdouts were milling about the dwindling embers of a fire that had consisted mainly of pallets, broken 2x4s, and soggy cardboard. The conversation was growing thin, and the liquor was long gone when Wesley White stumbled up to the fire ring and whispered the rumor to El Gordo. There were no secrets in the Detour Hotel, however. El Gordo made Wesley share what he'd told him. 5 men slowly approached the fire to hear Wesley's secret. He kept his hands in his pockets as he quietly described the location and state of the girl's body. The men shivered in unison and tramped nervously with the news. Wesley wished he hadn't seen her at all. It scared the hell out of him. Despite El Gordo reassuring him that it was no big deal, he was flustered. He'd only seen a dead person once before. His father. Christopher White had been shot while sitting in his car in broad daylight in 1999. The car had been idling and parked out in front of his house in Edge Hill. After hearing the lone gunshot and a squeal of tires, Wesley and his sister Trish ran outside to find him slumped over on his right side, greasy sprays of viscera blown across the passenger seat. Wesley could remember running up to the car with a shaky recklessness. He was wearing his Rough Riders t-shirt. Neighbors were standing on their steps, afraid to come closer. Trish jumped into the open window of the car, screaming craziness as she did so. She grabbed her father and squeezed him as she cried. She hadn't been afraid of Chris's lifelessness like Wesley was. She was asking him questions, expecting answers from her father's half-closed eyes. Then again, she acted like nothing had changed for years afterward. Trish's denial persisted. Wesley couldn't relate. He couldn't pretend that he hadn't witnessed the horror of that afternoon. But seeing the girl's body tonight wasn't as scary. Wesley didn't know her. He shouldn't have said anything. People were starting to gather to discuss what to do, and Wesley found a growing pang of shame for having tattled. Blue was jumping up and down with his hands in his pockets. The thumps of his footfalls on gravel echoed in the still night. His gray shirt had faded text over his heart that read, "Pretty good wreckers." He was astoundingly high and hadn't slept in over 48 hours. "I gotta see this! I got to see this! Take me up there," Blue demanded. His soft jaw rattled with a numb quiver. "She's not even a mile from here. You could walk it." "I just did," Wesley told him. "What'd she look like?" El Gordo asked. "She's laying on her stomach. I couldn't tell. Blonde hair. She looks like she's sleeping, but I don't know. It's too cold." Wesley dug the toe of his threadbare shoe into the sand of the underpass. Blue let loose an incomprehensible stream of profanity. We got ourselves a mission, boy, a real live fucking mission. Deliver unto us a woman, Lord. Buddha glowing light, you done it this time. Blue turned circles, arms outstretched like a Pentecostal preacher, 10 minutes to noon on Sunday. El Gordo crossed his arms and leaned over to Wesley. I'm heading up there to check it out. Come on, Wes. I can't let this asshole go alone. El Gordo punched him in the shoulder and started walking north. Toby, get over here. We got ourselves a mission from our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Blue called over to the tents. Toby gave him the middle finger and crawled under his tarp. Blue dismissed Toby's refusal and dug around in his pockets. It was nearly 5:30 in the morning, and Blue had one more miserable crystal to smoke. He produced the glass bulb and walked over to the cinder block fire pit. Wesley crossed his arms and followed El Gordo. He caught up to him a couple hundred yards up the track. You think we ought to call the cops? El Gordo gritted his teeth as they passed into darkness. Not with the living, talking crack rock following us. The cops will round all of us up, El Gordo said. They pushed through the narrow hollow of denuded sticks that enclosed the tracks. One of the two sets of tracks had dormant rail cars sitting in wait for a morning transfer. The smell of bituminous coal was thick and greasy. El Gordo covered his nose with his sleeve as they passed the fifth heaping car. We could throw him off the trail, Wesley said. El Gordo stopped and looked at him. Which line's she on? This'n. But he might think she's on the east spur, Wesley motioned with his hands. Let's just get on up there. All luck he'll forget about it. Better luck he goes east, El Gordo told him. The temperature was sinking fast. He could see his breath with every exhale. A low, gray fogginess had covered everything. He couldn't see more than 50 feet into the leaden night. Willow branches sagged under the weight of gathering frost. The coal cars transitioned to corrugated metal boxcars with unknown contents. This other train must have pulled up a little while ago. I don't like this part of the tracks when it's only one lane, Wesley said. El Gordo reached out and plucked at the dewy branches as he walked. Nothing's coming down the line. Relax. Wesley nodded and felt a nervous urge to apologize yet again for having found the girl. It's a sorry sight. I'm sorry I even told you all about it. She don't deserve to be seen like this. Then again, I don't think she ought to stay this way. I felt a lot of ways about it. El Gordo scoffed. We gotta do something about it. I get the feel some of us might get rounded up for shit like this unless we meet it head on, El Gordo replied. They passed a boxcar spray-painted with the words, Ideas Within Flesh. For over 5 minutes, the crunch of their feet on gravel was the soundtrack to their journey. The highway was silent in the distance. They had passed no less than 90 idle cars on the westbound line. This stretch of tracks rarely held this degree of stillness. When the night has come, Blue called out from the darkness behind them. Wesley stopped walking. The two men turned and looked back into the night. And the land is dark, and the moon is the only light we'll see. Damn it, he's gonna wake the fucking neighborhood, El Gordo said. They turned and marched north once again as fast as they could without stumbling over the rail ties. The first slivers of the east spur transfer appeared beneath their feet. Wesley and El Gordo could still hear strings of sing-songy hooting and hollering from Blue's direction. Come on, this way. If we get past here and he doesn't see which way we went, it's a 50-50 shot. Wait, El Gordo said. He squinted into the darkness toward Blue in the direction that they'd come. A soft flow of wind pushed north along the tracks. Like a knife tearing through a curtain, the train's headlight pierced the fog and barreled down on them. The horn blast rattled El Gordo's skull. Dive! El Gordo grabbed Wesley by the back of his shirt and yanked him toward the rocky embankment. They went end over end down the slope as the locomotive rumbled by them at 40 miles an hour, emitting pterodactyl screeches of wheel on steel. El Gordo was upside down in icy sludge. Wesley was moaning next to him. They wallowed onto their backs. The train again blasted its horn as it chugged along, shaking the spindly trees above them, sucking wind down the line as it passed. Get up! Get up! El Gordo screamed at him over the blare of railcar motion. Wesley's eyes rolled and he squeezed his knee. We gotta make sure that tweaker doesn't get to the girl before we do, El Gordo yelled in Wesley's face. He died! He had to have died! He was on the tracks! Wesley yelled. El Gordo held his arm and grimaced. In the near-perfect dark, the train sailed by, mostly empty beds. El Gordo pulled Wesley to his feet. Wisps of broom sedge were waving north with the train's flow. The hell he did. Look! El Gordo pointed up at the tracks. A shadowy figure ran past them, jumping along, pelting the cars with rocks as he ran. El Gordo blinked his eyes against the cold draft of the train. It was Blue hollering something about ransom money. "Come on, let's get going." El Gordo yelled at Wesley and took off up the embankment, crashing hand over hand through dead twigs and brown beech leaves. The final car on the train clacked by, and the red light on its rear died in the enveloping mist ahead. "I can't catch y'all," Wesley yelled out to him. "She's under the first street light where it punches through the chain-link fence." El Gordo climbed up onto the tracks and took off running as fast as he could. He trusted that nothing was in front of him on the tracks as he propelled himself into a loping sprint. He'd been faster in his youth, but with this terrible visibility he felt clunky and out of shape. He'd catch that tweaker Blue, though. He was fast enough. He started to count his steps but lost track around 80. His gasps were deafening as he caught sight of the glowing streetlights. The orange pea soup started to congeal into shapes. He could see Blue standing over a white girl's body, puffing huge vapor clouds into the night. Mierda. "She's in good shape," Blue told El Gordo as he trotted up to the scene. Blue snorted and wiped his nose on his shirt. El Gordo put his hands on his knees and gasped for breath in the starlight. "Doesn't get any easier than this," Blue said. Strips of orange streetlight crisscrossed the scene. Blue squatted and ran his hands through her hair. "Don't touch her!" El Gordo yelled at him. "I do what I damn well please," Blue said. He started to undo his belt. "You moron. They'll have your DNA. They'll pin this all on you. They'll send you to the chair." "She's a kid," El Gordo told him. Blue ran his fingers across the girl's face. "He ain't got me on any record. I'm a ghost." "She's cold as an ice cream cone," Blue said. "Stop touching her!" Wesley yelled as he made it up to the scene. He lumbered out of the shadows and yelled again. "Stop it! Leave her alone!" "What do you do about it, retard?" Blue asked. He stood up and dropped his pants to his ankles. El Gordo rushed forward and produced a gun from his pocket. He stuck the barrel under Blue's chin. "You gonna die with your thing out?" he whispered. Blue's glassy eyes met El Gordo's. El Gordo pulled the hammer back and smiled at the loud click. Blue started to shiver as the cold steel dug in further. El Gordo's closely shaved head was steaming. "I killed 2 men in Texas for less disrespectful things," El Gordo said. The gun quietly clattered as it shook in the night air. Wesley took a knee as he gasped for breath. Blue's teeth chattered. The thrum of the passing train had simmered to a memory. El Gordo took a deep breath and stepped back. He kept the gun trained on Blue. "This isn't some drifter trash. This is a little girl. I guarantee you someone's looking for her. Just because it's too late for her doesn't mean you get to destroy her again," El Gordo explained. The second street light on the parallel road flickered to life. A new line of light cut across Cara's legs. "Wesley, go down to that coffee place that's on Gallatin. They open at 6. They got a phone. Tell the cops that they can meet me here. Bring them back over here if they show up at the cafe," El Gordo explained. Wesley nodded and stomped off down the gravel path toward the broken fence. "You think you're a hero or something? You got some kind of guilt making up for something you done?" Blue asked. El Gordo still trained the gun upon him. "I'm making up for things you done. You still got that slide in your pocket?" El Gordo asked him. Blue nodded. "Throw it in the woods and get the fuck out of here. You don't know how we ride out here. You ain't even got a coat on. Fuck you, you fucking amateur. This is our territory," El Gordo told him. Blue's hands were shaking. He slowly leaned down and brought up his pants. The glacial seep of groundwater through the incised stone of the rail canyon thickened to ice as Blue walked back up the tracks. He threw rocks at the parked boxcars as he retreated. El Gordo paced for a few minutes as he unwound from the confrontation. Eventually he knelt next to the girl. She wasn't wearing a coat either. No purse or wallet. He looked up to the east, still an hour until dawn. He felt into her front left pocket. There was a receipt inside. He pulled it out and unfolded it. Rhythmic bangs grew louder as the boxcars woke up and grinded to motion. El Gordo looked up and watched the nearest boxcar start to roll. He tilted the receipt down into the streetlight's glow and read, 2 ices, a roll of chapstick, and $20 cash back. El Gordo carried the receipt several hundred yards back toward the Detour Hotel. He looked back over his shoulder to make sure that he was out of the line of sight of the girl's body before wadding up the receipt and tossing it into the woods. He could hear the first mild screams of an ambulance siren. He leaned down and undid the shoelace from his shoe, carefully threading the lace back out through each individual aperture. He tied the lace around the branch of a frozen mulberry a few yards from the tracks and squatted to search the undergrowth for hollow logs. Chapter 33. Even when you know something awful is true, you just don't want to believe it. Cara Ann had overdosed on fentanyl. She wasn't forced to take it. She wasn't murdered in some elaborate plot. She wasn't a tragic pawn in a killer's game. No one would swoop in at the direst moment and rescue her from a desperate standoff. She was disposed of like an empty styrofoam cup when she'd become inconvenient. She had spent her own $20 on the sack of fentanyl. She started coughing immediately after drawing a hearty line of the junk up her right nostril from the dash of a 2013 Honda Pilot. Within 3 minutes, she was in full cardiac arrest. She leaned over in her seat and feebly tried to swallow. The man with whom she was getting high also nodded off for 15 minutes or so. He too had snorted a heroic line of the same junk. He'd been doing so twice a day for nearly 2 years. When he came back around, he noticed that Cara Ann hadn't moved. He touched her neck and it was cold. He steadily built his breath up to match his heartbeat. It took several minutes. He carefully squeezed the door handle and mustered the strength to push it open. He got out of the car and ran around to the passenger door in an uncoordinated shamble. He opened the door from the outside, unbuckled her, grabbed her by the sweatshirt and threw her to the cold gravel. He thought twice, took off her sweatshirt, and threw it in the trunk. He fished out the girl's wallet and dug around. He quivered as he read her name from her shiny new driver's license. He put her wallet in his pocket and ran his hand through his hair in disbelief. Breath steaming, he got in the car, started it, and drove away. His identity remains a mystery. Tens of thousands of other people died in the same way in the same calendar year. 5 of them died the same way in the same week in Metro Nashville. Most of them were not found face down next to train tracks. None of them had a father in law enforcement. This stark reality was not lost on certain media outlets in Middle Tennessee. Lee Silver of No Longer Nashville offered the bluntest of write-ups after the damning toxicology report was released. The following paragraphs are part of the letter from the editor section on page 5 of the paper's February 28, 2017 issue. In the late 1970s, studies were performed at Simon Fraser University in Canada regarding the nature of addictive behavior in lab rats. Dr. Bruce Alexander and his colleagues found that lab rats kept in isolated cages were dozens of times more likely to exhibit self-destructive behavior than their socialized cohorts when both were exposed regularly to morphine. Years later, Alexander is still hesitant to apply his findings to humans, but the suggestion remains. When given the option of a drug escape, is one likely to select the option of a fleeting drug high when surrounded by family, friends, and the joys of the natural high that comes with that healthy interaction? The evidence is striking. Yet isolation doesn't only occur in cages or laboratories. Isolation can occur in crowded spaces, schools, workplaces, and homes. Isolation can be spiritual, sexual, or self-imposed. Isolation is trending. Isolation is easy. Could isolation be the prevailing motive social force of our time? We are all left scratching our heads at what's happened to the communities around us. Vicodin, heroin, again, fentanyl, who's doing that stuff? Perhaps the proper question is, who are we? Of what are we each capable? What are we each capable of ignoring? If a bright young woman like Cara Ann Harper can be so easily extinguished, who among us is innocent? Are we all culpable of a fatal naivete? What does each of us owe? None of these questions are likely to be resolved soon. To choose punishment or retribution for those caught in the grips of this epidemic is to choose the denial of something more devious within, something more systemic, and something that seems to grow in power each day. There are many among us that desperately need help and they are not receiving it. Is our society adaptable enough to understand the problem and do something about it? Charitable foundations are not enough. The Department of Public Health is outgunned. The epidemic knows no age or race or class. It's happening in public, in broad daylight before our eyes. Assistance must start in the home, in churches, or in schools. We must start looking at one another, listening to one another, and communicating the cost of this problem. I'm not sure that many Tennesseans are ready to do that, but it doesn't matter if we're ready. It's already nearly too late for most. For some, it's entirely too late. Rest in peace, Cara Ann.
On the next Detour Hotel.
Did Mr. Stroot eject properly? He asked. Wren's butterflies went up in flames. Her head spun as she tried to keep it together. Fleet knew the name of the man who had died last month. He probably knew a lot more than he was letting on. Of course he did. Wren rocked gingerly in the chair. He did not. He wasn't in good shape.
Detour Hotel is written, recorded, and produced by me, Aaron Rogge, in rainy Nashville, Tennessee. Additional music by Lee Rosevere, Airglow, and Soft and Furious, licensed under Creative Commons 3.0. This work is adapted from a novel of the same name by the same person and is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to real people or occurrences is a coincidence. Paperback and Kindle versions of Detour Hotel are available on Amazon. Thanks for listening.